They came together, or were brought together, depending on how one interprets the fractal, and gave form to their design. Forged, scribed, shaped. The exact word is elusive. Each architect gave a portion of themselves, and thus the pattern was drawn. It is from here that the language becomes clearer. With a framework in place, all that we now comprehend came to be, as if reality were nothing more than a fungus growing upon the frame. 6 forces now in balance, and from their intersections arose others. A simple structure, growing infinitely more complex.
Sometimes Alphyron refers to the reality as the song of the first ones, and the way in which he describes its creation is very similar with the way in how we make our musical reality. The 7 natural notes create the framework of the musical scale, a frame in which there are 7 positions to be occupied by 7 notes. A frame from which 2 essential structures emerge that use these 7 notes in 2 opposed and complementary ways through which we make songs. The melody and the chords. The melody is the horizontal structure of a score. It is the succession of notes over time, and it is the part that we usually hum because it is the one we remember most easily. Chords are the sound produced when 2 or more notes sound at the same time, and the succession of chords over time is called harmony. Harmony is considered the vertical structure of a song because it determines the path that the melody will follow. Throughout a song, there are times when a note in the melody sounds at the same time as the sound of a chord. If we want both sounds to sound good, sound consonant, the note of the melody will be one of those that make up the chord. On the other hand, if the note that sounds on the part of the melody is not within the chord, it may sound dissonant. The sound of both structures may sound unpleasant, as if they did not fit together. In other words, a song is built in a similar way to how we build a bridge. The pathway of a bridge is built on the piles which support it, and, in turn, the piles of the bridge are connected to each other by the pathway. So if there are no piles, there is no pathway and there is no bridge. Well, the same happens with songs. Harmony, the succession of chords, are the piles on which we build the melody of a song and, in turn, determine its direction, its destiny. If you want to know how they are created, on the screen you have the link to the video of Jamie Altozano talking about them and their role in music. I recommend you to watch it because the rest of this video is based on the truths that are revealed in it. Within the frame created when the C note is the first, the C major or C Ionian, 7 triad chords are built, 1 for each note. The sound of a major chord is perceived as cheerful and luminous, while the sound of a minor chord is perceived as sad and dark. And the sound of a diminished chord is perceived as tense and generates uneasiness. It is not pleasant to the ear. So, in conclusion, 3 are major chords whose sound is cheerful and luminous. 3 are minor chords whose sound is sad and dark. And 1 is a diminished chord whose sound generates tension. Don't it seem familiar to you? In the previous video, I showed you how, within the same frame, you can create 7 different patterns, thus creating 7 different ways of perceiving the same song, the same reality. 3 patterns created happy and luminous songs. 3 patterns created sad and dark songs. 1 pattern created songs that caused us restlessness and tension. We didn't like them. Both modal scales and the chords are created from 7 different notes. So in conclusion, 7 first ones, 7 notes, 7 chords, 7 modal scales, 7 cosmological forces. Seeing that the sound of a chord is perceived as happy or sad, luminous or dark, in the same way that a song is perceived as happy or sad, luminous or dark, depending on which pattern is used for its construction. And seeing how chords and patterns have the same origin, one of the 7 notes, I thought, perhaps the sound relationships between the 7 notes were what caused those sensations? Perhaps there was a strife between the 7 notes? As you know, musical notes are not just a number, they are numbers within numbers. They are complex tones formed by a simple tone called the fundamental or first harmonic, and infinite simple tones called the overtones. The frequencies of the overtones may be whole multiples, e.g., 2, 3, 4, etc., of the fundamental frequency, in which case they are called the second, third, fourth, etc., harmonics of the fundamental tone. If you remember, the premise used by Pythagoras through which he found the complex tones that we would later know as musical notes, was very simple. Find those tones that will sound good to each other. That is, musical notes are related to each other by their consonants, by the number of harmonics in common, beyond the fundamental harmonic, which is nothing more than a number that we use to order them within the musical scale, from low to high sounds, from low to high vibration frequencies to differentiate them from each other. This idea of consonance, believe it or not, is reflected in the game in one of the three virtues of the sacred light, and that Uther remembers when he recovers the soul fragment captured by the Frostmourne.
This is Alonsus Chapel in Strathholm. The day I became the first of the Paladins.
Come, Uther. Take your spot so that we may begin. In the light we gather. In its grace, our brother will be born anew. Uther, do you vow to uphold the tenets of the holy light?
I do.
What are these tenets?
The three virtues. Respect, tenacity, and then compassion. Seeing beyond our differences. Understanding our similarities. Feeling for those who suffer. Even if... Oh, Arthas.
Consonance and compassion are in essence very similar. Compassion, according to Uther, is seeing beyond what separates us, that is, to see similarities instead of differences through the use of reason. Seeing what is not seen. The 7 notes produce 7 unique and unmistakable tones, all of them different when perceived by our ears. But if we try to see beyond what our senses capture and understand what is hidden behind it through the use of reason, our third eye, we discover that they are not so different. Consonance is the harmony between different tones that sound good together because of the harmonics in common. The closer one note is to another, the more consonant its chord is, its sound is pleasant to the ear. The further away one note is from another, the more dissonant its chord is, its sound is unpleasant to the ear. Among the 7 natural notes, which are a reflection of the nature of the first ones, there is a strife between consonance and dissonance, between the harmony and the lack of it. Are the 7 cosmological forces related to each other just like the 7 musical notes are? In the previous video you saw how each cosmological force was associated with a modal scale according to the luminosity or darkness perceived when listening to the same song using each of the 7 patterns. In this way, the 7 patterns created a gradient from light to dark, which coincided with the way in which Blizzard graphically represented each cosmological force, since all of them were a mixture of light and dark in different proportions. Have you noticed that this gradient from light to dark is the same one that orders the 7 musical notes through their consonants, their resemblance? F, C, G. The 3 notes that create joyful and luminous patterns and chords are associated with the forces of light, order, and life, respectively. These 3 forces are the vertices of an equilateral triangle with the tip facing down, which symbolizes flexibility, change, balance, and offspring. It is a feminine and lunar symbol associated with the water element and the figure of the Great Mother. D, A, E. The 3 notes that create sad and dark patterns and chords are associated with the forces of death, disorder, and shadows, respectively. These three forces are the vertices of an equilateral triangle with the point facing upwards, which symbolizes divinity, ascent, prosperity, harmony, and royal power. It is a masculine and solar symbol associated with the fire element and the figure of the father. Separately, both are two opposite triangles, one of the fractals used by the first ones and that Steve Danuser took care to emphasize by repeating Alfirim's phrase. So much awaits discovery in the geometry. So many truths lie in the intersections, the fractals. But when both triangles come together, they form an hexagram or seal of Solomon, a six-pointed star that represents the union of opposites, the balance between the masculine and the feminine, the material and the spiritual, the earthly and the divine. Creating the mortal plane. A plane that represents the union of opposite built through balance and harmony, the consonants. But as Alfirim said,
In balance? Possibly. But that might be wrong. If 6 equal 1, then what is the other? The one outside the pattern.
the 7 notes, despite each having a unique and characteristic sound, are linked by their consonants. Each note is a perfect fifth of the other. All different, but in essence, similar, being part of a big family, since they all have the same origin, the note F. The force of light.
In the light, we are one.
Although in every self-respecting family, there is always a black sheep, right? The furthest note from the note F is the note B. They are the first and last note in this gradient from light to dark. When they sound at the same time we perceive dissonance, we do not perceive an harmonious and balanced sound. Instead, we perceive a sound that generates concern, tension, and uncertainty. Knowing this characteristic, finally I understood why the sound of the triad chord of the note B is perceived as tense by our ears. It is a chord in which 2 dissonant notes sound at the same time. And also, I understood why the other 6 chords do not generate that perception. They are chords in which 2 consonant notes sound at the same time. The Locrian mode, the pattern created when the note B is first, builds songs and realities from dissonance. Its chord is dissonant. The other 6 modes, the patterns created when the other 6 notes are the first, build songs and realities from consonants. Their chords are consonants. These 7 modes, despite being different, have a common element. The same 7 notes. Knowing that the 7 notes build 6 consonances and 1 dissonance. And that the reality of the first ones is a song created from the framework of the musical scale. It means that within any song, within any reality, there are 2 options. The union of the different through the harmony and balance created by the 6 consonances. The division of the different through tension and strife, created by dissonance. That is, if all reality is constructed using the same framework of the 7 musical notes. Discord, darkness, is not outside the pattern, outside of reality, but is within it. Within each modal scale, within each cosmological force, within the powerful beings that represent them, there is the darkness and dissonance of the 7th. But the 7th knows it because everything contains a part of him. He knows that it is only a matter of time that the song of the first ones, their reality, becomes a dark song, a dark reality built using his pattern. Alfirim, in his early research on the origin of reality, tells us,
These 6 forces existed in strife. Well, not strife in the way one such as you or I would see it. Opposition, surely. But whether malignant or benign is unclear. There was imbalance, until there was a need for something more.
At that time, Alfirim was still unaware of the existence of the 7th and its discord, but he sensed it. Why? Because even though the number 6 is divisible by 2, Alfirim says that they were in balance. Because there were not 6, but 7. And those 7 were considered neither good nor bad, that concept did not exist among them. I already told you that musical notes are like the letters of our language, sounds that combine to build more complex structures from which we create stories. And just like the letters, the musical notes, on their own, are just as important, further reinforcing the title of their architects, the first ones. None is more or less than another, neither better nor worse, simply different. So how did they manage to create equilibrium from imbalance? Perhaps the framework of the musical scale concealed a truth? Within the musical scale, each note or chord receives a certain name or degree, depending on the position it occupies, establishing a hierarchy called tonality. Tonality is formed from the relationship that exists between the notes of a scale with a main note, called tonic or first degree, which is supported in one way or another by all the other, which are organized around it. Don't worry, deep down it's very simple, and Jamie Altozano explains it wonderfully well in his video. Forget for a moment that there are the 7 notes and there are only the 7 numbers of the musical scale, the 7 positions. These 7 positions are repeated throughout the infinite sound spectrum. After 7 the 1 returns. The position 1, the first, the tonic, is the most important within the 7, it is the center around which the other 6 are organized. The number 7 and therefore the 7 musical notes, in isolation, are in balance. But when creating the musical scale framework, we set one of the 7 notes as the center. We create a balance around that note. In this way, the framework of the musical scale can be defined in 2 different ways. 7 notes that come together. Or 6 notes are gathered around one. Seeing the framework in this way, along with the strife between the 7 notes, I completely understood and deciphered what Alfiram was trying to tell us in his texts.
They came together, or were brought together, depending on how one interprets the fractal, and gave form to their design. Forged, scribed, shaped. The exact word is elusive. Each architect gave a portion of themselves, and thus the pattern was drawn. It is from here that the language becomes clearer. With a framework in place, all that we now comprehend came to be, as if reality were nothing more than a fungus growing upon the frame. 6 forces now in balance, and from their intersections arose others. A simple structure growing infinitely more complex.
Knowing that the mortal plane represents the union of opposites by means of balance and harmony. Perhaps the central position of the mortal plane, around which the rest of the 6 cosmological forces come together or are brought together, reflects how the 6 musical notes are organized around a central one? If so, the mortal plane is a central plane supported in one way or another by all the other cosmological planes, which are organized around it. Friends, Firam's ramblings were not mere follies, but were truths waiting to be deciphered.
The nature of the 6, possibly 7, possibly infinite. Among the superstitions conveyed to me by Eriktu, superstitions I, of course, dismissed as the fanciful mythos of an uncivilized culture, one lingered within my mind. For you see, it takes a truly exceptional intellect to transcend what one is taught and retaught by so-called scholars, open to only a narrow possibility. Eriktu spoke of 1,000 truths, which I at first took as a sign of scattered indecision. But the key to interpreting the writings of the first ones lay in setting aside what I had believed and accepting a greater reality beyond it. Suddenly, I perceived the pattern and its fractals not as one truth, but layers of intersecting truths. Just as we, from our first moment of consciousness, know that death is the foundation of all existence, so there are beings whose nature is fundamentally different from our own. Imagine then, based upon the truths I have told you, that each of these forces could, and I stress could, for the fractals may yet reveal another path, be embodied by a host of transcendent beings as powerful as our own eternal ones. I have but scratched the barest surface of the truths that point me ever closer to the sepulchre, and I will devote my every moment to discovering its location. A few final questions for your consideration, good reader. What if, again, this is still purely speculative, the mortal plane is not some distant corner of reality that the first ones created to supply us with souls and anima? What if it is the very nexus of existence, where death is but one of many great powers that hold sway? If truth, what would this say of mortal souls and their potential? And if the 6 or 7, or, excuse my imprecision, each vie with one another to claim it, could they be driven by the unconscious knowledge that there exists some other force outside our understanding that seeks it as well?
The research into the void here is commendable, but ultimately futile. How could you possibly understand what the Titans did not?
Within the framework of a musical scale, the notes F and B are separated by the interval known as the diminished fifth. Do you know how that interval was known in medieval music?
Diabolus in Musica.
The diabolus in musica, or the devil in music, refers to the tritone interval that naturally occurs between the notes F and B, separated from each other by 3 tones apart. Such dissonance was considered in medieval music as a rupture and a strife to be avoided according to the musical treatment of the time, since it was considered a truly sinister interval of sound that broke with the ideal of the perfect and the divine. In the Middle Ages, practically all aspects, both philosophical and artistic, were governed by a strict and closed theocratic system. Everything converged towards God, and everything was explained from the point of view of the divine as the logical cause of all things. Therefore, all intellectual study always had a divine perspective, and the effect and order of all things was always represented by the figure of a God who was at the same time the center and harmony of the universe. God was the very first cause of creation and order in the universe, the beginning and end of all things. Theorists imitated, according to this ideal, any proportion so that it would be consonant, avoiding any dissonance that would signify a rupture with the harmonic ideal. In this way, the sciences tried to imitate the celestial order and the spheres as a reflection of God's work on earth. According to this, all dissonance was avoided since its eruption into music was considered an imperfection in a work that had to be perfect. During the Middle Ages, a harmony was subtracted from the 7th chord of the major scale, the one possessed by the devilish tritone, the one in the Locrian mode, so called by the ancient Greeks. This prohibition gave rise to a diabolical superstition associated with this musical interval, which prevailed for several centuries. Knowing this, do you now understand the relevance of the discovery of the book called Enemy Infiltration in Revendreth? In it we discover how the nathrezim, created by Denathrius, infiltrate each of the cosmological forces, sowing distrust and setting them against each other, inciting division and discord instead of harmony and balance. The nathrezim are intelligent, cunning, and manipulative, and refer to themselves as Thalkituan, which means unseen guests. These incredibly powerful vampiric beings are masters of dark sorcery, infiltrating mortal civilizations, acting as tacticians and lieutenants on the battlefield in times of war, but they generally prefer to manipulate and undermine their enemies from the shadows.
Reveal yourself, Mal'Ganis!
The Harvester of Wrath. How I have missed your purity of conviction. A pity it will now be lost forever. Nathrezim, bring me her fangs.
Mal'Ganis, we need not be enemies. Join us to save Revendreth and end your exile.
We were never in exile, you gullible fool. It was all part of the Master's plan. While you remained fixated on a paltry medallion, we seized the true prize, Remornia, with the Sire's essence held within it. Our mission never changed. For eons, we have done the Master's bidding in secret across countless realities. The Scourge, Argus, all pawns in a game beyond your grasp, one that now nears its end.
If the nathrezim are like this, why wouldn't their creator, Denathrius, be the same, or worse? Perhaps Zoval was merely a pawn in Denathrius' plans? Who do Denathrius and his cunning nathrezim really serve?
You could have sought another way, brother. Imagine what we could have accomplished together.
Xavius's tricks are cunning. Why reveal yourself when you can control from afar? Xavius, running from one master to the next, scrambling for power, yet defeated again and again. The god of the deep picks a poor champion. Or is there something else at play?
The cunning ones kneel before 6 masters, but serve only one. You are one of forces unseen.
Despite all the truths revealed so far, there may be some skeptics who think that none of this makes any sense, because how could Blizzard have developed the history and cosmology of World of Warcraft in the same way we create songs? I don't know if you have noticed the name of each of the degrees of the musical scale, but if you have, surely the name of one of them has caught your attention. The 5th degree, the dominant degree. Is the dominant degree related to the magic of domination? To find out that truth, I put a small fragment of Jamie Altozano's video and you will see how Jamie Altozano got ahead of Blizzard.
El séptimo acorde contiene este intervalo, pero no es el único. Como os dije en el vídeo sobre acordes, los hay que no solo tienen tercera y quinta, sino también séptima. Pues, si al acorde de dominante le pongo su séptima, fijaos en lo que aparece. Sol, si, re, fa. Este es el infame y todopoderoso acorde de séptima de dominante. El acorde con más energía direccional de toda la música tonal. El acorde que cada vez que lo produces, te suplica que vuelvas a la tónica.
On every musical scale and therefore, in every song, in every reality, in every being of that reality, a dissonant interval can be constructed, an interval that generates tension, the devil's interval in music, the tritone. Within the quest chain that ends with the reforging of the helm of domination, a dark helm, in the crown of wills, a luminous crown, we receive the help of the Primus, the creator of domination magic.
Domination is akin to communication, a language, if you will. One so powerful that it interferes with a creature's very understanding of itself. This is why it is almost impossible to resist.
Do you know the name of the first mission he gives us? Hello, darkness. A curious choice of words, don't you think? In it he tells us, I created domination as a tool to punish Zoval. My anger informed that creation, and now we pay the price for my hubris. Even eternal ones err on occasion, but we are not without hope. Take the half of the broken helm of domination, and test it upon one of your own. If it retains enough power, it can then be used to test it elsewhere in Zereth Mortis. The title of the mission, along with its text, confirms that within the Primus, as within all reality, there is darkness. The same darkness with which Zoval betrayed his brothers. Anger is one of the 7 deadly sins and is defined by Dante, in his book Divine Comedy, in this way. Anger is the love of justice perverted to revenge and spite. The Primus held his brother Zobel, the first arbiter, in high esteem, and after his betrayal he could only feel anger for him. His love of justice was transformed into revenge and spite. Within a musical scale, the dominant chord generates tension because its tonality is far from the center and tend to progress to the tonic chord, which is a state of stability and rest. That was the intention with which the Primus created his magic, hoping that in this way Zobel would come to his senses and return home. But his anger, the darkness, the dissonance that existed within the Primus, contaminated that creation and instead created a dissonant chord, the dominant 7th chord.
Once, Zoval stood among us as the arbiter, yet he defied the will of the First Ones, and sought to unmake the balance of the cosmos. For his crimes we stripped our brother of his power, and bound him to the maw. It was I who scribed the runes of domination upon his flesh. Once I hoped that all those ages spent in the maw might change you, that you might repent for your sins. But you have only grown more malevolent.
The dominant 7th chord is the chord with the most tension of all, and it is the one that, every time it sounds, asks us to return to the tonic, to rest, to balance, to consonance, because its sound is very dissonant. It is a sound that our ears reject. But instead, Zobel used that magic to continue to spread domination, dissonance, and strife throughout reality, thanks to the help of nathrezim and his nathrezim.
Why, Zoval? What drove you to this end? You preserve that which is doomed. A cosmos divided will not survive. What is to come?
6 voices in discord. Without harmony, the anthem will be ended.
Its part flawlessly. 3 keys remain. Then they will see. Death was never meant to be chained.
In patch 9.1, Zobel annexes the lost kingdom of Korthia to the Maw. That patch was called Chains of Domination. Knowing that the dominant 7th chord is the chord of strife and tension and that it is the chord associated with the magic of domination, the magic imbued with the darkness of the Primus anger, and that the reality of the First Ones reflects the musical reality, you should not be surprised by the existence of a musical resource called the Chain of Dominance. As the name suggests, the chain of dominance is a harmonic progression of dominant 7th chords and is used as an easy way to escape from the tonal center, from the tonic, from the first degree. I'm sure you now understand Fyrim and his final conclusions, after knowing how Zobel intended to put an end to the reality we know, to build a new one.
Though the jailer has been defeated and the Shadowlands made whole again, I find myself unable to celebrate these victories, for I have studied the inner workings of the sepulchre, seen the powers with which the jailer sought to remake reality. And these observations fill me with a fear that shakes the very core of my being. It is clear to me now that there must be a Zereth for each force of the cosmos, and within them an inner sanctum akin to the sepulchre. And if that is true, then these sanctums must be connected on some fundamental level. A connection that the jailer sought to exploit. What he began in the sepulchre was meant to cascade outward from one Zereth to the next, until all were dominated by his power. The heart of the Shadowlands acting as a doorway to the heart of each cosmic force in turn, one after another bound to his will.
Can your mortal minds fathom how long I have waited? Every event set in motion, every pawn put into play, all to claim the power slumbering within your world. The soul of Azeroth, wounded, vulnerable, yet teeming with potential. Potential that I will use to eradicate this flawed reality. Death claims the soul of your world. Now, bear witness, mortals, to eternity's end.
Zobel sought to dominate the soul of Azeroth and use its power to dominate the rest of the Zereths, the rest of the forges from which the realities of each cosmological force are created. One Azeroth to rule them all.
The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
Do the Naru speak of the eternal conflict? That the entire history of your world is but a fraction of the time that has passed? Of those that came before the Draenei? No?
It began with the forging of the Great Rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men who above all else desire power. For within these rings was bound the strength and will to govern each race. But they were all of them deceived, for another ring was made. In the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring to control all others. And into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all. One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring. But there were some who resisted. A last alliance of men and elves marched against the armies of Mordor, and on the slopes of Mount Doom, they fought for the freedom of Middle-earth.
This conflict is but a shadow of an ancient war that predated the meddling of the Titans. Infinite armies clashed in ceaseless battle. But I'm sure your little war is impressive, in its own way.
Victory was near. But the power of the ring could not be undone. It was in this moment, when all hope had faded, that Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword. Sauron, the enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth, was defeated.
As you can see, as I advanced in the knowledge of the musical language, the language of the first ones, the more secrets were revealed to me. The famous eternal strife between cosmological forces was nothing more than a reflection of the tone strife that exists between the 7 natural notes within a musical scale, all of them different but related to each other by means of their consonance or dissonance. The diminished fifth interval, the interval that occurs naturally between the notes F and B within a musical scale, was considered in the Middle Ages as a forbidden interval. The dissonance between these two notes was considered the devil in music. Initially, we might think that dissonance is a bad thing because its sound is not pleasant to us and therefore we avoid, reject, and even deny it, as when a musician makes a mistake by playing the wrong notes, as if it were a mistake of the pattern.
The pattern is flawed. Reality must be remade. I will see it done.
However, although a consonant harmony is usually sought in musical work, through the use of dissonances, we can expand the harmonic palette by using chords other than the strictly consonant ones, becoming a very valuable tool to produce certain sensations or to break conventional schemes.
The light would have your kind remain obedient and stagnant. I offer the gifts of freedom and strength. I hope you remember my kindness.
In this way, a general principle of harmonic tension and relaxation is established. A dynamic element of the musical flow based on the regular march of the consonance and dissonance cycle that would not exist if music consisted of a mere succession of consonances.
I know the Naru consider us horrors to be resisted. We do not share this view. They are merely beloved brethren that lost the true path. They will return to their masters in time.
This dynamic principle was refined during the 14th century by the Italian composer and theorist Marchetto da Padua, who in his treatise Lucidarium reformulated it, justifying it on the basis of Aristotelian physics. Imperfectum appetit suam perfectionem. The imperfection tends to its perfection.
Your allies consider me a bad influence. Yet all I've ever done is speed you along the path you chose.
In the Middle Ages, consonance was considered a reflection of God's perfect work within music. Dissonance, on the other hand, was considered a forbidden sound, an error in music that could only be the work of the devil, staining the most perfect work of God. Today, that contrast is not seen that way. Consonance and dissonance are not enemies, but both allow a song to progress, to change, not to always be the same. Dissonance pushes us to consonance, imperfection pushes us to perfection. So is the dissonant sound good? No, its nature is what it is. It causes tension and strife. Its sound is dark and depressing. It is the eternal suffering. But that characteristic pushes us to consonance and balance. Instead of giving up, we continue to fight. We clung to the hope that things would get better to avoid falling into despair and depression in the bottomless pit of darkness.
Still you fight. Still you refuse the gift.
That contrast of light and dark, of consonance and dissonance, of good and evil, as tools by which we progress toward perfection from imperfection, reminded me of Plato's allegory of the winged chariot. I already talked about it in the video I titled, The Eternal Strife, in which the fragments of the soul and its memories were nothing more than a reflection of the three components of the soul for Plato. I leave you its link in the description in case you didn't see it or want to remember it again. Thanks to that truth, I discovered the reasons why Arthas, Uther, Sylvanus, Tyrant, and Anduin made the choices they did, as well as to understand the consequences they had for them. I think that video now takes on more relevance after seeing that the soul and the music are not so different. In both there is a strife between opposites, and in both opposites are necessary to achieve perfection. And in both there is a figure that uses them to achieve an end, our will. Because after all, we are the ones who create music using consonance and dissonance, just as our reason is the one that must control the white horse and the black horse in our soul. That is why I have considered it appropriate to attach that video as an epilogue, so that you can understand the music of the soul. I'm waiting for your comments telling me if everything that has been revealed so far is surprising you, or if you would ever imagine that music could solve so many mysteries within the game's story. If you are not subscribed, I encourage you to do so because, although there are still many videos ahead, there is little left to reveal a great truth, and only those of you who are subscribed will be able to see it before it is available to those who are not. It is my way of rewarding those who have believed in me and in the truths I am revealing to you. Having said this, remember, consonance and dissonance is to music what the black and white horse is to Plato's soul.
Tell the others what you told me.
You all have witnessed the jailer's power firsthand. Without the means to resist his domination, we have no chance against him. Anduin may be the key, if we can save him from—
You dare speak of freeing him after all you have done!
Sylvanus held the Mournblade that bound him. Her presence may help free Anduin from the jailer's grasp.
I will never trust her.
Then trust in me.
Always, Uther. Very well. We will prepare to enter the sepulchre and save Anduin. Together.
Do you not understand? This one is bound to me.
Anduin!
Fulfill your final purpose. Annihilation. The fate of all who carry my blade.
My son. This blade does not belong to darkness. It was forged by valor.
And also by honor.
Its legacy and ours are with you, even here.
Now, let it be finished.
Arthas. Is this all that remains of him?
The last flicker of his scarred spirit, consumed in the forges of the jailer.
No crown, no throne, not even a soul left for judgment. I hated you, hunted you, and with each selfish act became you. That is my burden to bear. But your legacy is at an end. Begone then, Arthas Menethil. May the last whisper of your name fade and be forgotten.
Before entering the band, a small conversation takes place in which Uther, Jaina, and Sylvanas are present. Sylvanas says, Anduin may be the key. If we can save him from. In that moment, Jaina interrupts her to accuse her of being responsible for Anduin being in the jailer's hands. For Plato, the soul is portrayed as a compound of three components, a charioteer and two winged horses. Inside our soul exists a conflict between these three components. The driver, our reasoning, has to control the black horse that doesn't listen, our wild feelings, while working with the white horse, our better instincts. Just like driving a real chariot, it's tough to manage but important to keep everything in balance and heading toward the right direction. We are constantly told that everything is a fractal. Why wouldn't those three characters symbolize the three components of the soul? Uther the Lightbringer, the white horse. Sylvanas, the dark forester, the black horse. Jaina, the reason, the charioteer. Jaina doesn't trust Sylvanas' words, but Uther, on the contrary, encourages her to trust Sylvanas, saying, If you don't trust her, trust me. Why does Uther, the opposite of the dark horse, trust her? Remember again, our reason has to control both horses because it is the only way our soul ascends. So, both horses, despite being opposites, are equally important. Plato used this idea to explain that to live a good life, we should lean on our ability to think and understand, instead of just going with what we feel like doing. The Phaedrus, written by Plato, is a dialogue between Socrates and Phaedrus, an interlocutor in several dialogues like the theme of love. In this dialogue, the charioteer represents a guiding principle in the soul, with its own desires. The black horse represents an impulse to move boldly and disorderly toward desires, while the white horse represents the impulse to remain still and resist those desires. Both horses can use in following reason and are therefore capable of being trained by the charioteer, who must also be trained to guide them without imposing excessive restrictions on them or giving in to the impulse to advance without any restrictions. In this work, the three capacities of the human soul share a divine winged element, and all three also have bestial characteristics. The black horse, then, is not innately evil, as it can be a force for good if properly trained. Without the guidance of the charioteer, the black horse moves shamelessly and haphazardly, bowing its head, stretching its tail, taking the bite with its teeth, and dragging the chariot forward shamelessly in search of a desire. However, after being tamed, the black horse helps move the chariot in an orderly manner towards the beloved, that is, with reverence and fear. The black horse is essential to be able to reach nirvana, and once it is mastered, both horses obey reason. Uther's black horse was captured by Frostmourne, the real reason that prevented him from ascending as a Kyrian. Uther, through the visions he had the day of his oath as paladin, the culling of Stratholme, and the battle against Arthas, recovers it and learns that he must master it because not doing so, it led him to his own death. Sylvanas' white horse was captured by Frostmourne, so her reason only obeyed the wild instincts of the black horse as she yielded to the impulse to advance without any restriction. But her reason was trained progressively thanks to Anduin and other characters, who questioned what she was doing and what she was becoming. Finally, the echo of Arthas' words was what her reason needed to tame her black horse and stop pursuing her desire to achieve nirvana at any cost. So both, Uther and Sylvanas, through the use of reason, the charioteer, managed to control the impulses of the dark horse. Uther learned that this part of him is necessary to be able to ascend, but he had to learn to control it and accept it. Sylvanas learned to train her reason to dominate the dark horse and, in this way, avoid its doom. In the video of Chapter 7, in which I talked about what the soul was and unraveled the concept of Plato's myth of the winged chariot, applied in Uther, Sylvanas and Tyrant, we saw how the goal of any soul, whatever it is, mortal or immortal, is to return to the origin from which it came. This goal is like the concept of Dharma in Buddhism, in which the highest purpose of the human soul is to know itself. But since such a soul is locked up in a mortal body, it must learn that it can only return if it correctly uses both opposite horses. And by correct we saw how Buddhism defines it as the only way to reach nirvana through the Eightfold Path. Correct refers to correcting something that is crooked, that deviates from the path. Who corrects horses, whether white or black, for Plato? The reason, the charioteer. There are no good or bad acts, neither being guided only by the white horse, nor being guided only by the black horse. Listen to both and through reason determine the only right way. There are only the right acts. Do you understand what Blizzard means by layers of truth? Arthas already had his soul crooked before he gave his soul to Zoval as payment to gain the power of Frostmourne. In life, Arthas was arrogant, he believed himself superior in many aspects and was looking forward to the day of his coronation as king. When the threat of the undead appeared, Arthas set out to eliminate it at any cost. Once Kel'Thuzad was defeated, as the cause of the poison food, he saw that it was not enough since it had already reached Stratholme. Once there, he didn't mind leaving Jaina behind or accusing Uther, his mentor and friend, of treason. He only sought revenge and to kill the being behind it all, Mal'Ganis. But remember, in the book Enemy Infiltration, the nathrezim say,
"This is, after all, the solemn duty for which you sired us. As you are fond of saying, once a desire is understood, it can be exploited."
Arthas' desire for revenge was exploited by Mal'Ganis to take him right where he wanted, Northrend. Once there, he only had to let him fall deeper and deeper into the trap, to darken his soul even more. He had no longer just betrayed his friends. He had no longer only betrayed his people by committing an extermination. He had no longer only betrayed the mercenaries, whom he ordered to burn his naval fleet, and then accused them in front of his army and killed them. There was less and less of his reason left in his soul. Without reason, without will, it is easier to dominate a soul. And so it was, he reached Frostmourne, he wielded it and what little was left of it, was dominated. From then on, it wasn't Arthas who was making the decisions, it was Zoval. Until we defeat him at Icecrown Citadel, and Devas, with Uther's help, throws his soul into the maw.
I see only darkness before me.
Now, cast him into the maw. Return him to the darkness he served. His eternal suffering awaits.
He was my student.
Remember what he did, and take your vengeance.
Not vengeance. Justice.
On the other hand, Sylvanas was seeking to break the cycle, samsara, to attain nirvana, the liberation of the soul from the prison of the body. Why was she looking for that? Because when her soul was fragmented, the last thing she saw was suffering. She saw that life was not happiness or fair, but painful and imperfect, and that is why her soul wants to return to the origin. Sylvanas commits suicide once Arthas is defeated in Icecrown Citadel, but why does she do it? Because she believed that by hunting down her enemy, she would find peace and justice, but she discovers that she still feels pain, suffering, and that everything around her is fleeting and ephemeral. An eternal torment now that she no longer has a goal.
The pain of flesh is fleeting. True torment lasts forever.
It is at this moment that Sylvanas meets the jailer because her soul goes straight into the maw. Remember that, at that time, the Arbiter still was judging mortal souls. Why does her soul end up in the maw? Because for the doctrine of Buddhism, the goal is to divest oneself of the body spirit, to discover the unborn, to attain nirvana. Suicide is therefore meaningless from the point of view of this way, because if you have the courage to end life, you can also find the courage to live. We must never turn our backs on the problem but face it without fear. Whether we are alive or dead does not change anything.
There is no escape, not in this life, not in the next.
But if the action of suicide is not for a personal matter, but for a greater collective good, things change. The same rules no longer apply there. And it is here, I think, that a whisper told to us by a spirit in the Baronol Cemetery in Drustvar comes into action. She seeks that which must be earned by sacrifice. In the absence of seeing the end of expansion cinematic, my bet on this whisper is Sylvanas, since she is an undead after having received a violent death and fragmented her soul, knows the truth, neither live nor die. The end of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The end of the wheel of samsara to reach nirvana. When her soul was incomplete and her reason yielded to the wild impulses of the black horse to advance without any restriction, she believed that with the death of Arthas her desire of revenge and justice would end, and with it her suffering. But she only discovers that the hunter is nothing without his prey. Without a purpose, there's no reason to life, and that's how it is, she commits suicide. But it is no use, her soul is doomed. While in the maw she meets Zobel, who lies to her saying that the current system is unjust, that instead of being judged a soul with the purpose with which it takes actions, it should be judged by the consequence of those actions. That is, the end justifies the means. Sylvanas, deceived by Zobel, has now a new purpose and returns from the Shadowlands thanks to the sacrifice of a Valkyr. Since then, Sylvanas' reason, guided only by the impulses of her dark horse, pretended to help the Forsaken, the Horde and even the Alliance and Legion, but she had planted the seeds of the war between Horde and Alliance, to free Zobel and reconstruct this failed reality. In other words, she is acting exactly like Arthas. Her selfish acts take everything and everyone she has loved ahead. But when she discovers the real intentions of Zobel after helping him to recover his sigil, the Arthas voice echoes in her head once more, and then she reminds her true purpose. To be free and not to serve anyone. In that moment, the reason, her free will, takes control over the black horse, and Zobel, as punishment, returns her the fragment corresponding to the white horse, which helps her to take charge of her decisions while her reason was dominated by the black horse. Now, with her soul complete, she has a new goal, to stop Zobel. But what will happen when Zobel is defeated? In the mortal plane there is nothing left. She has betrayed everyone, her people, the Horde, her friends, and even her family. So, she finally understands it. She must sacrifice for something greater than herself, to leave her selfish thinking, and to restore hope to Azeroth. My soul for the souls of the Night Elves that I sent into the maw. In this way, the souls of the Night Elves return to Azeroth and together they will re-establish their kingdom with the creation of a new world tree from the Terra Vilun. Reincarnation. The cycle is restored. And another clue that makes me think that this will happen is the publication of her book as a biography. When the Wrath of the Lich King expansion came out, a biographical book about Arthas was also published. And we all know how Arthas ended up in that expansion, right?
Father, is it over?
At long last. No king rules forever, my son.
I see. Only darkness before me.
Without its master's command, the restless scourge will become an even greater threat to this world. Control must be maintained. There must always be a Lich King.
The weight of such a burden. It must be mine, for there is no other.
Tyrion! You hold a grim destiny in your hands, brother. But it is not your own.
Bolvar! By all that is holy.
The dragon's flame sealed my fate. The world of the living can no longer comfort me. Place the crown upon my head, Tyrion. Forevermore, I will be the jailer of the damned.
No, old friend. I cannot.
Do it, Tyrion! You and these brave heroes have your own destinies to fulfill. This last act of service is mine. I must be forgotten, Tyrion. If the world is to live free from the tyranny of fear, they must never know what was done here today. Dead, and that Bolvar Dragon died with him. Now go, leave this place, and never return.
And speaking of sacrifices, what was Anduin's one? I already talked about these cinematics in previous videos on my channel, but if you have noticed, just because I talk about a cinematic, a scene or an object, does not mean that I have said everything it hides. In fact, the one of Anduin talking to Sylvanas is already the third time I put it in my videos, and in each one highlighting different points of view. In the final cinematic of patch 9.1, we see Anduin in a more relaxed state alongside Sylvanas. On my Twitter I asked the following question. How can Zobel dominate Anduin if his soul is not fragmented? an extremist fan of Anduin's character, someone who defends him against all odds, replied that it's because Sylvanas stuck his sword in Anduin, since in the cinematic Sylvanas tells him, "Join our cause or be made to serve." Its argument was, how is Anduin going to join something that is the opposite of what he represents? So there was only the option of him being subdued because Anduin says, "Not what you made me to be." Before Sylvanas gives Anduin a choice between these two options, a philosophical discourse takes place in which Sylvanas, using rhetoric, tries to question Anduin's beliefs. He, obviously, offers resistance. Anduin's goal is to be able to save his friends. He's isolated in Torghast, he has no idea about everything going on outside, so he doesn't know that his friends have really been rescued by us. That is why he weighs pros and cons, and his logic, his reasoning, tells him, if I want to save my friends, I'm not going to be able to do anything here. I must get out of here. But to get out of here I only have two ways. Either join or be forced to serve. If I am forced to serve, I know that my will disappear forever, and, in that way, I will not be able to save anyone. If I join, even if it is not what I want, I know that there will be a small hope of being able to defeat Zobel, since if I pretend that I serve him willingly, I will be able to find out what is happening and thus try to put an end to it. If you notice, that's exactly what happened to Sylvanas and that I already commented on in the videos. Sylvanas pretends to be under the yoke of Arthas to find out what was happening and finally try to kill him, which was unsuccessful at the time. So Anduin willingly joins to convert, but not because it is what he wants, but because it is the only way to save the rest. That is, he sacrifices himself for a greater good, an altruistic act. He sets aside what he believes and does what is right for others. In the final cinematic of Chains of Domination, we see how Anduin is being dominated by Zobel, and it seems he can't resist it. He knows it, but still there is hope, because he left behind his compass before entering the portal to Zereth Mortis. He trusts that the compass will serve to make friends remember who he was, for fear that he will not finally be able to escape the clutches of the jailer's domination, and his soul will be condemned forever, just as it happened to Arthas, who also offered his soul voluntarily. Why? Zobel says it clearly to Jaina, "This soul is linked to me." His sacrifice was such that he agreed to link his soul with Zobel if it gave him a small chance of saving his friends. When Zobel finally orders him to execute the final order, the annihilation, his soul, his energy, is being absorbed by the sword. Zobel says it, "The fate of all those who use my sword." In those moments, his father and Sorfang appear. But it is not their souls or their spirits that appear there, but the memories that Anduin keeps of them. I won't get tired of saying it, but there it goes again. Reason, the will, is what has dominion over the soul. It and no one else is the one who controls the decisions it makes and the one who leads both forces. Every soul has a purpose. Every soul has a reason, and only one. His free will, at the last moment, reminds him of who he is and what the sword is. He regains control of his soul and breaks the sword, thus freeing what little remains of Arthas' soul. Sylvanas, seeing what remains of Arthas, understands what would have remained of her soul if her will, her reason, had not doubted Zobel's words when she remembered the echo of Arthas' voice. Like Anduin, her will, her reason, reminds her of who she is, and that she is the owner of her soul and her decisions, and she does not allow himself to be dragged along by Zobel and his lies. Sylvanas finally understands that the end does not justify the means. Something that Arthas never understood because he had willingly offered his soul to Zobel. Arthas' soul was linked to Zobel, but unlike Anduin, Arthas did not use the white horse to make that decision, but it was the dark horse's desires. And what other character was willing to do the same as Arthas? Tyrande. As Sylvanas prepares to flee Ardenweld, Tyrande summons Elune and tells her, "The time has come. my life for hers. That is, like Arthas, she pays with her own life, with her soul, to fulfill her desire for revenge. But Elune is not Zoval, and ultimately does not allow such a sacrifice. Because for Elune, the end does not justify the means. So much for the analysis of the cinematic Evangeline in the Sepulchre of the First Ones. I hope you liked it, and if you are not yet, subscribe to the channel and encourage others to watch the videos. In this way, more people will see the game with different eyes, and I promise you that the following videos will not leave anyone indifferent. See you, and thank you to those who have been cheering me on from the beginning. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Arthas. Is this all that remains of him?
The last flicker of his scarred spirit, consumed in the forges of the jailer.
No crown, no throne, not even a soul left for judgment. I hated you, hunted you, and with each selfish act became you. That is my burden to bear. But your legacy is at an end. Be gone then, Arthas Menethil. May the last whisper of your name fade and be forgotten.
Oblivion offers solace. Take